Okay, thank you. So the very famous story that the Gemara in Gittin tells is it's a story of coarseness. It's a story of a lack of compassion. It's a story of anger, and it's a story of indecisiveness, all rolled up into one tragic, long episode, which the Gemara said led to the destruction of our temple, of the Beis HaMikdash. So I'd like to go through the story first of all, and then to do some analyzing. And I thank Rabbi Josh Flug for providing wonderful Mara Makomos, wonderful source materials that I've chosen from and that I have distributed to you. The Gemara is in Gittin. Just interesting enough. Gittin deals with divorce and Chorban Beit, or sending away. And certainly the Chorban Beit HaMikdash, the destruction of the temple, was a sending away, God sending away the Jewish people. So it's a little confusing on the pages there, but in English it goes straight through. In the Hebrew it's 1, 2, and 3, so we'll follow along. Kamtza Bar Kamtza choruv Yerushalayim. The Gemara says because of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, Yerushalayim was destroyed. And we'll soon see, maybe we'll have time at the end, about this. Tel Gavra de Rachme Kamtza. There was a person who was a very close friend of a fellow by the name of Kamtza. Ubal Divavei Bar Kamtza. But he was a bitter enemy of another fellow with a similar name. The other fellow who he was a bitter enemy of, his name was Bar Kamtza. Avad Sudata, he made a big wedding feast. Amalei Lishame, he told his attendant, Zil Aitili Kamtza, go and bring Kamtza to this wedding. The attendant got confused. Azal, he went, Aitile Bar Kamtza. Instead of inviting his buddy Kamtza, he invited his buddy Bar Kamtza. Ata, he arrived. Probably pretty surprised that this enemy had invited him to the wedding, but perhaps deciding to let's leave this behind, let's have a reset, and he came to the wedding. Ashchet Haviyativ, well, the wedding maker saw that his bitter enemy Bar Kamtza was sitting there. And he said, you are an enemy of myself. My ba'itacha, what are you doing here? Kum, get up, poke, out, up and out. So he wanted to evict him from the wedding. Amar lei, Bar Kamtza said to him, Ho'il va'atai, since I have come, I'm here already. I imagine he said, let's not make a scene out of this. Shavkan, let me stay. V'yahivna l'cha d'mei ma da'achilna v'shatina. I'll pay the caterer's bill for my meal. Let me stay, and I'll pay that which I will eat. I'll pay the bill for my meal. We jump over to number 2 on the right-hand side now. Or if you're in the English, right, it's the next page. Amar Leilo, the Baal Simcha, the person making the wedding, said no. Amar Le, he said to him, Yahivna lecha demei palga de su'udatech. I'll give you the cost of half of this wedding. Just let me stay, don't evict me. Amar Le, the Baal Simcha said to him, Lo, no. Amar Le, he said to him, Yahivna lach demei ku'ula sudatech. I'll give you the cost of the entire wedding. of at least the caterer's part. I don't know about the band, the flowers, and the other things. But the caterer's bill, the Su'uda, I'll take care of that. Amalei lo, he said no. Nachte biyadeh, he took him by the hand, by the arm. Okme, he stood him up. Va'afke, and he removed him from the scene. Amar, this Bar Kamtza said, Hoil v'havi yatvi rabbanan v'lo machu bey. If the rabbanan were sitting there. Now, our Gemara doesn't say who the rabbanan were, but he said the rabbis were there. V'lo machu bey, and they did not protest. Shmamina kanichaluhu. It must be that they are okay with such behavior. Ezel, Echel, Behu, Kurza, Be Malcha. I'm going to go and I'm going to slander these Jews to the king. Now he himself was a Jew also. Azal, he went, Amalei LeKesar, and said to the Caesar, Mardu B'cha Yehudai. The Jews are rebelling. Amalei Mi Yemar, who says? Amalei, he said to him, I'll show you. Shadur luhu korbana. Send them a sacrifice for them to offer it in their temple. Chazit. See. Imakarvinle. If they'll offer it on your behalf. Azal, the Caesar, went. Shada biyadeh, and sent in the hand of Bar Kamtza. Agla talta. A choice third-born calf. Or 3-year-old calf. Either way. Bahadi Takate, as Bar Kamtza was coming with this beautiful, unblemished calf to the temple, Shada Be Muma Benufsvatayim V'amila Bedukin Sheba'ayin. He put a very small blemish, some say on the lip of the animal, others say by the eye of the animal. Duchta Didan Havi Muma Uladidhu Lo Lav Muma. Something that we Jews consider to be a blemish for our sacrifices, but in the Gentile world, that's not viewed to be a blemish at all. Savar Rabbanan L'Kruve, Mishum Shalom Malchut. The Rabbanan wanted to offer the sacrifice, even though it had a blemish, but because we have to maintain good dealings with our government, certainly when it is a Roman government, right? When it is a violent, oppressive, vindictive Roman government. Amalhu Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas. Rabbi Zechariah, the son of Avkulas, said, we can't do that. Yomru Bali Mumin Craven Lagavi Mizbeach. People will walk away with a misconception and they'll say that you're allowed to offer blemished animals on the altar. Savar lemikdale. So they thought, okay, this Bar Kamtza is coming to get us killed. That is called a rodef, someone who's pursuing you to get you killed. We should kill him. Delo lezel v'lema. That way he won't go back with any bad reports. Amalu Rabbi Zechariah. Rabbi Zechariah again spoke up. Yomru, people will mistakenly say, Matil mum bekachim yehareg. Someone who places, someone who blemishes, who intentionally blemishes a consecrated sacrificial animal, he is deserving of death. And therefore, they didn't offer it. They didn't detain this Bar Kamtza. He came back with the news that they refused to offer the sacrifice. Rabbi Yochanan says, An v'tanuto Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, the humility, the humbleness, seemingly excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, hechariva et beitenu. That is what destroyed our Beit HaMikdash, our temple. V'sarfa et heichaleinu, and burned our heichal, the building. V'higlitanu me'artzeinu, and that led to our being exiled from the land. Yeah.
So, couldn't it be reasonably anticipated that if Bar Kamtza maybe wasn't killed, but at least wasn't detained, that it was a case of Pekuah Nefesh? I mean...
Good. Excellent. So let's see her.
I mean...
Right? You got it. So, yes, Dov.
Sure sounds like Yosef and his brothers joined.
Okay. Okay. I don't want to veer off.
I know.
Okay. So the question is, as Janet mentioned, why didn't Rabbi Zechariah allow for the offering of the sacrifice? This is pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means saving lives, right? That overrides a don't.
Yom Kippur, it overrides.
It overrides Shabbos.
Yeah.
It overrides Yom Kippur. Famous story, I believe, with Rabbi Yisroel Salanter. There was a terrible plague, and he instructed his students to take care of the sick and to do whatever they needed, right? And regardless of the day of the week, right? So people said to him, how could you be so lenient on Shabbat observance? And he said, heaven forbid that I'm being lenient on Shabbat observance. I'm being strict on the obligation of saving lives. So this is pikuach nefesh. And pikuach nefesh is doche, pushes aside almost all of the mitzvot. Right? There are 3 exceptions for which one would give up their life. But besides that, and certainly anything having to do with a blemish on sacrifices, we are meant to give up our... we have to push that aside in order to save lives. So, there is a Maharshal that I'm quoting from Rav Avigdor Nebenjal, the former chief rabbi of the old city of Yerushalayim. And he writes as follows. I'm sorry, I'll have to it's in Hebrew, I'll translate it in English as we go along. Maya HaCheshbon. What was he thinking? What was the calculation of Rav Zechariah ben Avkulas? Did he not know this would lead to war with the Romans? If they would disgrace, insult the Caesar? And did he not know that the saving of lives would override bringing a blemished animal on the altar? The answer is yes, of course, we go against Torah laws to save lives. Afilo eser lavim will go against 10 mitzvot, 10 prohibitions to save lives. Afilu chalo Shabbos Yom Kippurim, even against Shabbos, even against, like Ida said, Yom Kippur. It's mutter, it's permitted b'shvil pikuach nefesh. Aval, akirat haTorah lo nitchet mipnei pikuach nefesh. Something that's going to uproot, upend the Torah, that is not allowed. Im yilmudu din lo nachon, if they're going to, from this, derive an incorrect halacha, law, v'teitzei halacha ledorot, and that incorrect will then be transmitted for generations. Shebeit dino sheRabbi Zechariah pasak, that the Beit Din of Rabbi Zechariah ruled that Bali Mumin could be brought on the altar. That is akirat haTorah. That is uprooting the Torah. And the akirat haTorah, uprooting the Torah, eino nitchit pikuach nefesh, will not be pushed aside. Interesting. So you have to differentiate that other cases of pikuach nefesh, where it's clear that you're doing it for pikuach nefesh, that will not uproot the Torah. But here it's worse.
You think of Hannah and his sons.
Okay.
Who would, one after the other, would not
give, yeah.
But detaining Bar Kamtza, not killing him, just detaining him, so he can't go back and say the sacrifice.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting point. Right? Don't kill him, detain him. I guess they were concerned that, I'm not sure. Yeah, I hear.
A military.
But if that's the case, then why is he being held responsible? We said that his humility, seemingly excessive humility or misplaced humility, led to the destruction. What was his mistake then? The Gemara says, his humility destroyed our house. It burned the whole abode there. And exiled us from our land. What was the mistake that he made? And here he writes so powerfully. Choshvani, I think the mistake was Shechurban HaMikdash, the destruction of the temple. Upizur Yisroel bein ha'umot, and our being scattered out amongst all the nations. Shenigram kitotzar ha'me'aratosh Yisrael ben Akulos, which came about as a result of his ruling, which was to try to prevent an uprooting of the Torah. He akirat haTorah harbe yoter gedola, that caused an even greater upending, uprooting of the Torah than he was concerned and was trying to stop. Hare, being that we are spread out to the four corners of the land. One chacham, one wise sage doesn't see his friend, doesn't see his colleague. The Rif, Rav Afasi, he's sitting in Sfard and he's ruling his ruling. He's sitting in Spain making his rulings. Rashi is sitting in France, Yoshe B'Tzarfat, opposing Mashaposek, and he's reaching his rulings. Rambam Maimonides afterwards was sitting in Egypt, Uposek Mashaposek, and he's making his rulings without the ability to confer, to reach one clear view. V'nas the Torah kamei Torot, and our Torah has become like 100 Torot. That's what the Sephardim do. That's what Nusach Sfar does. That's what the Ashkenazim do. Well, the Ashkenazim from where? In Britain they do this. In South Africa they do this. In America they do, right? And it's become 100 Torahs. Where the Torah Tarif, the Rambam, the Rosh, the Ramban, the Rashba, and all the other Chachmei, great leaders of Israel, Ad Chachmei Doreinu, until you come down to the leaders of our generation, who should live for a long time. And we have all these different views and all these different opinions from all of the scattering that came about. Zohi Akirat HaTorah Harbe Yoter Gedola. That led to an uprooting of the Torah that was far greater than that which he was so concerned about and wanted to prevent. Ta'uto, the mistake of Rabbi Zechari HaTeifo, Shelo Sam Lev Lekach, Shemepsikuto, that as a result of his ruling, Yetze Bittul Torah Gadol Yoter, it would lead to a greater spreading out and uprooting of the Torah. Shekevan Shegol Yisrael Mimkoman Ein Lecha Bittul Torah Gadol Mizeh. The Gemara Chagiga says, once we were exiled, there was no greater Bittul Torah, there was no greater demeaning and diffusion and confusion of the Torah greater than that.
Why did they not think? Here the king, the Gentile king, brings his offering. What could they say? Okay, this one is not going to be. We're going to substitute. We're going to put something good over here. We're going to redeem it. We're going to get. We want to save our lives.
Yeah. I hear. Right? It's okay. Look, there are those that say. I wasn't going to go into this. There are those that say when we say his humility, it's not a knock against him. It's not his humility. We're saying that he had incredible humility. He was a tremendous tzaddik. From the heavens, it was decreed that the Chorban destruction was going to happen. Right. So it came about through him. But it was, right? It's right. Look, it's pretty clear that this was not the one event that was going to make or break it from the heavens, right? But this is depicting the issues that were at play there, which led, and there are many issues, as I said before in this story, which led to this Chorban. So let me go a little further over here. Let me go a little further.
Yeah.
The Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, his classic work that Kal and I have been learning on and off for a bit now is Mesilat Yesharim, right? Which is the path of the just. And he goes through the different midot, the different ways that one is supposed to view the world and move forward. And he speaks about there are times when a person might decide to be strict, but you can't be strict with blinders on. And sometimes strictness with blinders ends up causing, the Gemara calls it a chumra ha'ati lidei kula. Right? You're being strict, but you're not strengthening. You are dismantling through that. And he writes, we have it both in Hebrew and in English, and English is on the top of the next page. In Hebrew, we need to understand, you can't judge an act of righteousness or of chasidut, of being extra, al mar'ein harishon, just on the first glance, on how it looks from the outside. Oh, this is great, we'll be strict over here. El tzarech la'ayin, you need to look deeply. Ulit bonein, and to contemplate. Ad heichan toldot hamase magiot, until what will the repercussions, what will the ramifications of this be? Ki lefamim, sometimes hamase ba'atzmo yireh tov, sometimes it might look really good. Ulefisha toldot ra'ot, but what it will lead to will be harmful. Yitchayev lahanicho, you'll need to let it go. V'lo yaseh oto, and if a person does do this, does go ahead with this seeming act of righteousness, of strictness, because it seems to be a wonderful thing, without that contemplating the results, yechotei v'lo chasid, the person will be a person who is sinning and not doing an act of righteousness. And the first example that I didn't bring down here, that he brings, is the reason we fast on the day after Rosh Hashanah. That's called Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia. And Gedalia was the leader of the remnant of the Jews after the destruction of the temple. And someone was coming to kill him. And this was another Jew who was coming to kill him, and he had been set up by the nations, by the Gentiles to do this. And the hope was, which is what happened, that the Romans would say, oh, the Jews are killing one another, and the last Jews that were left in Israel would also have to flee. And someone warned Gedalia, Yishmael is coming to kill you. And he said, no, you're not allowed to accept Lashon Hara. You can't accept when people defame others. And he didn't accept it at all. And Yishmael comes, he goes to give him a hug, Yishmael gives him a knife, Gedalia is dead. Now, you're not allowed to accept it as truth, but you must be concerned it might be true, and thereby act in a careful manner. Perhaps put a metal detector outside of the office. That might have been an idea. Or to say hello to him from across the desk with a couple of big guys on either side of you to say hello. Right? So there it would seem to be chasidut. Oh, I'm not going to accept anything bad about another Jew, without seeing the repercussions, and that led to a furthering of the exile. And the second Beit HaMikdash, the Ramchal continues, was also destroyed through such chasidut. Asher lo nishkal b'mishkal tzedek, that it was not weighed on the scales of righteousness. Right? Throughout Mesilas Yesharim, he says you have to make a cheshbon, you have to weigh what will be a gain, what will be a loss. Sometimes what appears to be a gain, think a little further. That's going to be a loss. Right? We're not, it won't help the situation, it will hurt the situation. You have to be so careful, constantly weighing things. Right? The Bar Kamtza, the issue of Bar Kamtza. Amru, there, the Gemara said that we learned, Sover Rabbanan L'Krove, the Rabbanan wanted to offer it. Only Rav Zechariah ben Avkulas, Yom Rabali Mumin Craven L'Gav Mizbeach. Rav Zechariah said no. They'll say that blemished animals we brought on the altar. Savar lemikdale, they wanted to kill him. He said, no. Yom matzil mumbakachim yihareg. Right? Someone who blemishes a consecrated animal is put to death. So you see, as Ramchal learns, he wasn't weighing it properly. You have to have the guts and the shoulders to sometimes do things that might raise eyebrows, but if that's the right thing to do, given the situation, given your hopefully correct Torah calculation, then you've got to do that. Fascinatingly, Rav Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, who was the posek, the Jewish halachic decider of the previous generation, and all the big questions would always go to Rav Moshe, and he would often answer them in a way that no one else would dare be that lenient. But he had the knowledge and he felt the responsibility. And listen what he writes, this is fascinating. What my dear one, what you wrote to me. How can we rely on these novel approaches that I explained? And it goes against the view of other latter authorities. I'll tell you as follows. Is the Torah finished? Is whatever scholarship has been done? And therefore we just have to follow that? Chas v'sholem shenifsok, rak ma shenimsa b'sfarim. Heaven forbid that our halakhic rulings will be only on that which we find in previous books. And when questions come to us that are not found in previous books, it's an ever-changing world, and the questions are constantly changing, and new questions are coming up. And if lo nachriya otam, if we will not reach our conclusion of what the Torah says to do in that situation, even when we have the ability to reach that, certainly according to in my humble opinion, asur lomar kain. It's absolutely prohibited to have such an approach. The Torah will continue to be great also in our times as we expand and as we apply it to all the new things going on. And there's an obligation. A person who has the ability, the deep Torah knowledge in all aspects of Torah, in halacha, if he has the ability to reach a conclusion in a matter that comes to his hand, through what he can do through his close examination of Shas, of the Talmud, Poskim, and the whole array of halachic deciders that have come until this point, with a clear understanding, and with good proofs. Afshu din chadash, even if it is a new law, shelo dibro dotav svarim, that has not been discussed in the svarim, then he has to do that. Ach ein liot gas b'hora. One can't be haughty. One can't overstep. V'tzarich l'no k'she'efshar, and one should step back when possible. Aval b'makom tzarich gadol, but when it's a time of great need, kol shkein b'makom igun. Certainly we're talking about a case, as this was a case of aguna. Right? I don't know, I didn't look fully into this tshuva, but we had World War II. You had people coming back, women who survived World War II. And they don't know, there's no witnesses about their husband's death. She's a married woman. Is she an aguna? Is she not an aguna? Can she marry someone else? Or do we have to be afraid her husband might still be alive somewhere? These were the questions that Rav Moshe was dealing with. We're obligated to rule. Right? If we could see a way to permit a tragic situation, then we must. And we can't be from those who are too too humble. Who am I to rule in such a case? Ula again, bat Yisroel, and to cause a Jewish girl, a Jewish woman, to be an aguna, to be tied up, and not married, and not be able to get married. O ligrom lachshil b'isurin, or right, which often cause there to be impropriety instead of a marriage. O avrak l'hafsid mamon Yisrael, even if it's a monetary loss, if we can rule, then we must. We can't be overly humble. And see the Gemara in Gittin about the humility, he writes, of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, which led to the destruction of the temple. Shekasha, it's difficult. Lama Rabban so. Why do we say his humility? Mashayach zela anava. What does this have to do with humility? It was a halachic ruling. And the Maritz Chiyat says Davar Nachon. The Gamze Mamish Kiyotzei. Right, see over there what he says, and that's what we quoted, similar to what we saw in the Ramchal. Right, he was too humble to issue a radical ruling when it was necessary to issue a radical ruling. So we also need to rule when we see berayot with proofs, uvavana yishara, and with clear understanding. Certainly, b'makam igun kazeh latzil machshel kazeh. Certainly, when it is a situation like that of an aguna. So we have to have the gumption when necessary to make the calls. And it's always easy to say, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. But sometimes no, you can't causes more of a problem than yes, you can.
Rabbi,
Just 1 second, Jan, just 1 second. Colin?
is this something that we learn with hindsight, but at the time that they were making the ruling, or at the time that the rabbi was keeping everyone subject to what he understood the Torah to be, would it not be that had he not done that, we would have said by failing to keep the Torah in its condition that we were supposed to.
Interesting. So I would say to you this. The other rabbis disagreed with him. And they too were afraid to speak up. Right? The Torah or the Gemara's incriminating him to a certain degree is letting us know that he could have and should have done what the Mesilat Yesharim says. He had to have weighed it more carefully. And it's not like all of a sudden now we see there's a new concept. Right? It's a given that we can't just look at the surface and say, in Hebrew there's a great expression, right? Derech ketzara hi derech arucha. Derech arucha hi derech ketzara. The shortcut's the long cut, the long cut's the shortcut. Right? You think, oh, it's a shortcut. Right? And not just in terms of walking, but in life. Right? Shortcuts are often long cuts. The longer way, right, is often the shorter way. Right? That's a given that you always had to, and we're holding him responsible to a certain degree. We're holding him responsible for not making that calculation. Right? So it was from before. Yes, Aina.
The story of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza, two individuals and their impact on the Yerushalayim, is the other side of the coin of the story of the two brothers. Each of them would go up the hill to bring food for the other brother, and they would go up invisible. They didn't know that they were this act of loving kindness was where the temple would be built. The power of
working together, of caring about one another. Janet?
The other side.
So, it was like Rav Moshe and Rav Schneerson in the last generation, and who else? Who were the qualified decisors?
You had Rav Yashiv, you had Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach.
So who is it now?
Now you've got the person that I call is Rav David Cohen. Right, Rav David Feinstein is hard. Rav David Feinstein is Rav Moshe's son. It's harder to get through to him these days. But Rav David Cohen is we have right. Every generation will have. We there certainly, a person looks back and says, I have certain situations where I say, if only I could call Rav Yaakov Weinberg, Zatzal, with my Rosh Hashiva, to discuss this. I would love to hear his insight. We're always feeling the void, but have to. Every generation has to do their best.
So what, are there about 6?
It's very hard. It's very hard.
Because if you could identify enough, couldn't you then reconstitute Sanhedrin? 7.
Yeah. And getting everyone to agree might be somewhat of a challenge. Yeah.
Well,
The Medrash Eicha, the Medrash on Eicha, which is on the last page, has the same story with a few changes. If you'll just hear me out, I underlined the main points. We'll jump in the middle. Amalei al tavai sheni, he said to him, don't embarrass me, and I'll sit. Right? And I won't eat or drink. Right? I'm not going to eat anything. Amalei late at mesuba, you can't remain here. Amalei ana yihiv to make kol kolayt and suda, I'll give the money of the whole suda. Amalei kumlach, get up and go. V'haya sham Rav Zechariah ben Avkulas. Rav Zechariah was there. V'hayta sidet yado limchot v'lo micha. See, Rav Zechariah was not the one who wasn't accepting the sacrifice. He was at that meal. And he was too humble to speak up, to say, this isn't right. You can't do this. You can't humiliate this person. He was too humble. And that's what led to this. And that's what the Gemara is referring to when it says, An v'tanu tosh was Chai ben Avkulas, that is what burned the Heichal. Now, one last, and then another just quick point. The Chatam Sofer, he makes an interesting point. Right? If Bar Kamtza was just a regular guy, it's hard to imagine that you get humiliated. And it was a terrible, terrible, terrible humiliation. But it's hard to imagine that because of that, you become the person who's going to go to the Romans and get the Beit HaMikdash and get the temple destroyed. I mean, it seems to be as humiliating and horrific a situation as it was, this was an overreaction. Unless we say that this guy was a known Rasha. This guy was a bad guy. And that's why they didn't want him at the wedding. And that's why he was evicted from the wedding. And that's why, a Nazi comes to the wedding. I'm sorry, right? I can't enjoy, right? We have Holocaust survivors here, right? You can't be at this wedding, right? You have to be forcibly removed, right? There are situations we can understand this person can't be here. Someone who abused a girl when she was younger, right? Can't be at her wedding. Even if he wants to pay the whole bill, he can't be at her wedding. It's simple, right? There are situations. So we see where this led to. So we understand, right? He couldn't be there, right? Rav Zechariah was a very tolerant, perhaps overly tolerant person. Another thing we discussed. Perhaps an overly tolerant person. Perhaps to a fault. And he thought, we should have let him stay. Now he's concerned. He brings the korban, right? If we're all of a sudden going to bring a korban with a blemish, people are going to say, oh, something's strange here. What's going to happen? They're going to delve into this story, and they're going to see, and they're going to find out what a terrible person this guy was, and what happened while they wanted to throw him out, and that's going to cause a chil Hashem. Therefore, we can't allow that to happen. So his tolerance is what led to this whole ordeal. Just one last idea that I heard on this, which is interesting. We say because of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. Now, what did Kamtza do wrong? Why are we mentioning Kamtza? Say because of Bar Kamtza and the wedding guy. Right? So the simple understanding that I have is, well, no, because of the misunderstanding that came about between these two similar names of Kamtza Bar Kamtza, that's what led to it. Right? We're not incriminating Kamtza, right? But it's because of these two names that were easily confused. That's what led to this whole problem. But nevertheless, if we're mentioning Kamtza's name, then it seems that perhaps Kamtza is also somehow implicated in this. How is he implicated? What did he do? Right? He never got the invitation. What do you want from this guy? Right? The attendant invited the wrong guy. What do you want from Kamtza? So I forgot the name of who I heard this. Right? Probably what got the Baal Simcha so upset, the wedding maker so upset, was when he saw that Bar Kamtza was there, and Kamtza, his buddy, wasn't there. Why didn't Kamtza come? Why didn't your friend's making a wedding? Right? You could have come. Come. Right? Add simcha. Come. Right? There might not be a seat for you. Okay. So you'll eat at the shmorg. And you won't sit down at the main. But come. Be mesameach. Be mesameach. And had Kamtza swallowed the indignity of, he didn't invite me, I'm not going to go, then perhaps the whole Baal Simcha would not have gotten so upset when he saw the other Kamtza there, as long as his buddy Kamtza was there, and perhaps that would have diffused the whole situation. When I was living in New York, so an old high school friend of mine was having a second marriage. We've been very much out of touch, and then I heard that his wife had passed away, so I paid a shiva call and spent some time with him, and then we sort of fell out of touch again. And a couple of years later, I heard he's getting married. It was about a 20 minute drive from my house. I was so excited. Put on my suit, put on my tie. I went there, and when the dance was going on, I jumped into the middle, I grabbed him, and we had a great dance. I wasn't invited. We haven't been in touch. But I knew he'd be happy to see me. I was so happy for him. So I wasn't invited. So I went, and we had a dance. And I didn't stay for the meal. He told me to stay for the meal. I said, no, I'm fine. I got to go somewhere else. I didn't stay for the meal. So there are those that say that Kamtza is also somehow, to a certain degree, involved, right? And the amount of lessons that we can learn from this whole story, it's just a long list, on what we just mentioned, what Kamtza didn't do. Right? Bar Kamtza reacting in such a brutal fashion. The Baal Simcha, right? How he was over the top, it seems, over the top, right? Unless we explain as some wanted to explain, that this guy was a terrible person, but he was over the top with that. The rabbis there, right, not speaking up, not standing up for what's right, even though it would be uncomfortable, even though perhaps that was a table of some of their biggest contributors, and if they speak up, who knows how they're going to contribute when the next appeal comes around. But they didn't speak up. They didn't have the strength to stand up for what's right. And the Rabbanim later on needing to how we all need to make our cheshbonot, our calculations. This seems to be good. Think deeper, think again, right? Measure twice, cut once, right? Think it through, see what it might lead to. And the other Rabbanim who did it, right, and he didn't want to make the psak, the others disagreed, they didn't want to speak up. You do have to speak up, right? It's just the list goes on and on of things that we can learn about. These are the things which led to, as Rav Nebenshal said, how we are in this spread out situation of such disparity and such division. And as Ida mentioned, the beautiful medrash of the two brothers, one who was very wealthy and the other one who was very poor, and he didn't want to, he didn't want to embarrass him, right? So he would each day he would send over, each week he would send over things, right? And at one point the two of them met one another and realized what was going on, and they embraced and they wept, and the medrash says that's the place of what was the whole story? One brother had a lot of children, but was poor. I'm forgetting the whole measure. The other one was wealthy, didn't have children. This one felt bad for that one. That one felt bad for this one. And each one kept bringing the other one things and not knowing where it was coming from, until they realized that each brother was concerned for the plight of the other. And that's where they met and they embraced. They realized what was going on, and the Beit HaMikdash was built. So should it be speedily in our days. Yes, Linda.
Okay. I'm thinking, to some extent, and maybe I'm incorrect, we know that Aaron's sons were killed because they did something they were not supposed to do. How did the rabbis know that it's okay for us to allow this sacrifice that isn't acceptable?
Gesher Tsar Ma'od. The whole world is a very narrow bridge, and you've got to make the right call, and you have to be responsible. Take responsibility for making that right call. Yeah, right? Perhaps they thought that was the right thing, yeah, but it wasn't. It was that was not the place for their own radical self-expression, their novel approach.
I'm not sure it's radical self-expression, but rather simply doing what they thought was right.
Yeah. In the Kodesh Kodashim on the first day, yeah. That's what they thought was right, but it was grievously wrong. Yeah, I'd say Gesher Tsar Ma'od. It's that long, narrow.
Sometimes you can weigh it and just still not have the right perspective then.
Yeah, and that's why, sometimes you need to speak to friends, speak to mentors, to try to get another perspective. Sometimes we get locked into our own perspective and don't see it from another way. And, yeah. Thanks, Dov. Yeah, you're right. That's what I'm saying. Gesher Tsar Ma'od. Right? It's a narrow